An important part of woodworking has always been to have square and flat stock. For 500 years or even longer, we've had something that's called a planing stop that fits inside the bench. There's evidence of this from Andre Felibian's Principles of Architecture, written in 1676. With all the research that I've done with this, I've seen that people will cut square holes in their bench top. It's really not an easy task, so I came up with a couple different options. My first thought was to create something called a planing bolt. You can see that it's just a regular bolt that I've cut in half and added some teeth to. I'll show a really quick video on how I made this now. If we look at the head of this, you can see that there's a slope, and that slope helps to pull the wood against the table. Now as I put this in, watch as that crack disappears. You can see how it pulls down to the table. Now while this does work with smaller, thinner stock, when we switch to something a little bit wider, there's a chance of it pivoting. So the way to fix this is to use a square planing stop. I've decided to add this to the left side of my bench, and the nice thing about this is that when I don't need it or I'm not using it, I can lock it to the tabletop so that it doesn't bump into anything as I'm working. When I need it, I turn the knob a little bit, raise it, and then clamp it back down. And now there's less of a chance of it pivoting. Let me show you how I made this. A common problem that I see online when people go to make these is that you can't drill into the end grain and attach your teeth to it. The end grain is the weakest part to drill into. So what I've seen people do is come in and drill a hole and then add a dowel. Then they can drill and screw into that dowel. And that works. It's not a bad idea. So you might think, well, why don't you just put it on its side and then you can attach the teeth like this? But we really need to think about the plane and how much pressure we're putting on the block. The block is going to be stronger like this as the grains are going up and down. If we turn it, the grains are going this way, which could cause it to shear off. So my thought was to take 3 pieces of wood. I've got the grains going the same direction on both of these pieces, but my middle piece, which is ash, and these are hickory. My ash piece, the grains are going this way. That allows me to drill into it with still having my grains lined up like this, which will give me more strength. And by laminating all my pieces together, I'm going to end up with a stronger bond in the long run. So let me go ahead and glue these. The dimensions for everything, the materials, it's going to be in the description on my website. So go down there to check that out. As I glue this, here's just a fun fact. Crossing the grains like this works, they say, up until about 2.5 inches. So you never want to go more than 2.5 inches when you cross like this. And I should put my silicone mat down, so I'll do that now. If you slide around a little too much, you can add some salt. All right, we'll come back in a little bit when this is dry. Now for the actual teeth that will go on the top, you can use really any kind of steel that you want. I've got a piece of mild steel here, but I found this and thought this would be a lot more fun to play with. This is 01 tool steel. It's a 1/4 inch. It's 2 inches wide, which is the width of my block. I've got a really cool chalk pencil that I had a bite size on earlier this week that I'm going to use. It goes on really smooth, and it's a lot better than using a marker, which is what I usually use. So every one of these marks is a valley. My peak will come up and then go down to the valley. Peak will go up to in the middle, and then down to the valley on each one of these. So I want to come in here and I want to make a cut at each one of these lines, and I want to go in 1/4 inch. Now with my strip sander, I'll go ahead and add points to each one of these. Before I go any farther, I want to go ahead and set my block. I'm looking at making this so that it fits about halfway on this last part here, which is about 1/4 inch. So I'm going to set this to 1/4 inch. Now with that on the top, I'll come in here with my marking gauge. Just going to find the approximate center. I want to divide this into 3 different sections. Because I don't like to work with fractions, I'm going to switch over to the metric system. So it looks like I'm at 50 millimeters, so I need to divide that by 3. So if I divide this by 3, it's about 16 millimeters. So I'll set this to about 16 millimeters. And there we go. I'm going to go ahead and temper this. This is something that you don't have to do. And yes, this does look like a ghost from Pac-Man. Afterwards, I'll add a bevel, which I do suggest adding, but we'll go from there. I let this bake at about 400 degrees for 3 hours and then let it cool on its own. So I'm going to go ahead and sand and clean this up now. Before we add this to the block, we're going to finish up the block by adding a hole in the center. Where you put the hole is obviously going to be dependent on your bench. My bench is 2 3/4 inches in width. The center of my hole is going to be 1 1/4 inches from the bottom. So I'll go ahead and set that up now. I'm going to find my center by taking the 2-inch measurement that this is, and I'm going to go down to 1 inch. So right there, I'll drill out at 3/8 of an inch. If you plan on attaching this to your bench and you really don't want it to go up and down, then you really don't need to do anything else with your block. But I want to make this travel up and down so that nothing on the bench will bump into it later on. There's a couple ways that you can go from here, and that is that you can just add another hole down here and then cut between the 2 holes so that you have that play. But I want to take mine to the table saw and just cut that groove out and then add something on the bottom that will close it up again. Now I did say something about adding a little section in the bottom to close this up, but I'm not really that worried about it. I don't think it's going to be a problem. Now we're going to go ahead and attach the top. To find the center of each of these holes, I'm just going to take a brad point bit and use the size that I drilled the holes out with, which were 3/16. I'm just going to go ahead and tap the center out so I know where those holes are. I obviously don't want to drill these out at 3/16, otherwise my screws wouldn't fit inside. To attach it, I'm going to use an 1/8 inch drill bit, so I'm going to go ahead and drill that out now. And that's it. I did make the entire video showing how I drilled this out on my table, but they're very difficult angles to look at, so I thought it'd be easier just to take a section of wood that's the same width as my table and show you how I did it here, so it's a little bit easier to understand. First of all, depending on the way that your table is oriented, the grains on the end, you'll have 2 different ways that you'll want to attach this. If the face of your grains are sticking out, then you really only need a hanger bolt. You'll drill it in, add a couple nuts, and then tighten it down, and really that's it. You're done. You don't have to worry about going through the extremes that I'm going to go through. Because I'm working with end grain, I had to do something a little differently because the end grain is the weakest part of our board. So instead of drilling a hole in and then just adding this hanger bolt, I added a 3/8 square nut to the inside of my table. To find where to stop in the board, I took my thickness, which is 2 3/4. I cut that distance in half, which is 1.5 inches. That found my center. I took my nut and I found what half of the nut would be. This nut here has a 5/8 inch distance. So I cut that in half, which gave me 5/16. So I took the half of this and my distance and I added them together. That came to 1 9/16. So 1 9/16 is where I'll want to stop the bottom of this Forstner bit right there. That will mean that the nut won't go any farther than that and push up too far into the rest of the wood, because there's no way of getting this thing out once it's in. The distance I drilled from the edge is about 2 inches. I used a 3/8 bit in the very center of my table, the thickness here. I've got one of these little tools that I bought probably 25 years ago, and it keeps my bit straight as I drill. I'll see if I can find one of these. If I do, it'll be on the tools section of the website, and you'll just be able to click on it. After I drilled the holes out, I took the nut and I put it inside the hole. And the good thing about this is that even if you put it in at an angle or slightly at an angle, it doesn't matter, because you can always turn this when you get down to the bottom. Now you can make this a little bit bigger. It doesn't have to be a 3/8 hole. You can always add epoxy later on. But as you can see, it's not going in like I want it to. So what I did was I just turned it a little bit and moved it around on the top until I got it inside. Now the best thing to do would be to make sure that this is square, and then add epoxy in the inside by just unscrewing it a little bit and adding the epoxy. The second option is to just drill a hole straight through, and you'll use a dowel for whatever size it is that you drilled, and you'll replace that inside the hole, drill a hole straight into it, and then all you have to do is use a hanger bolt to finish it off. Now to find out where to put my dowel, I went down about 1/2 of an inch on my line that I drew, and I'll tap my drill bit in a little bit. Now when I go to drill, I'm just going to watch the drill bit to make sure that I'm lined up with that bolt. And now I'll go ahead and put it in. I'm not going to use any glue. It's also not very long. I don't think that's important either. And there we go. Now you just need to add a knob or even a wing nut. I made this knob for mine. You can watch that at the very end of this video. You'll see it there or in the description below. But that's it for this video. If you're interested in making this, I have a link to my website, which has all the plans, the schematics, the tools used, materials used, everything. It's all free. That'll be in the description below.